a lot of things. Like 0 is also implicit for enums. And so
Yeah,
that's
so
another place we've been bitten in the past where it can suddenly do the wrong thing.
I think the stream just died, by the way. Oh, never mind. Anyway,
Did it come back?
my mistake. It was my mistake. Sorry.
No. I pushed the end stream button and then resumed it because there was complaint of bad audio. So I tried disconnect and reconnect.
Anyway, so the two lines that I just put in chat, I declare a ulong array and then I call fill on that array comma 0. The IL that generates is what I just posted in chat. It calls the int32 overload instead of the ulong overload, which means that this would actually be a runtime breaking change, not a source breaking change in certain cases. Well, a source breaking change that where the compiler calls an overload that has a behavior that you did not intend. So source breaking change that manifests as a runtime breaking change.
That is a weird overload resolution decision by the compiler.
Actually, interestingly, that never would have compiled in the first place.
That would be why it would pick it then.
Yeah. For whatever reason, the fill of t array t value candidate is never even considered. That is strange.
There's probably some weirdness around how the natural type of 0 is an int, and so therefore signed. And signed conversions sometimes get iffy to unsigned types.
Maybe.
Or there's a compiler bug.
Okay, yeah, so that wouldn't, I'll take back what I said. That wouldn't be a breaking change because before this API, that code would not have compiled in the first place. With this API, the code compiles against the overload you probably did not intend. Oh, that's all weird.
Right, but my concern is more somebody currently calling array fill for whatever reason that they're calling it, and then they get a compiler error or they get a weird, it calls the new one and maybe fails a runtime check because the coercion didn't go the way they thought it was going to. Because like the sample implementation that they have here using a literal integral value, you're going to be sad if you call it with anything other than int. I mean, yeah, you can put a L or a UL or any of the things after it to get it to turn into the literal that you wanted it to, but the natural type of the T in that case is going to be int, and that doesn't equal the element type of the array.
Yeah, I almost want to say that the correct solution to this wouldn't be to add an overload of array.fill, but instead to make it easier to convert multi-dimensional arrays into, let's say, native span, and then have fill on that just work correctly.
That's going to be unsafe. Yeah, but that's unsafe.
Are MD arrays actually backed by linear data?
Yes.
So
and that's why it's unsafe, because you lose the bounds checks if you convert it to a linear span.
I mean, you would flatten the bounds. You would never buffer overrun there. Why would it be unsafe?
because you lose the you lose the bounds checks on the dimensions.
I mean, you lose the
Yeah.
notion of dimensions, but you don't change the number of elements.
Right, but that's also why it's unsafe, because now if you're trying to, for example, access um, uh, y times width plus x, and x is too large, you will overflow onto the next row unintentionally. Whereas if you're doing this properly with a multi-dimensional array, you get bounds checked and get an exception if your x is ever out of range.
Sure, but the question is, like, if you can make a span off of an MD array, then you could just use span fill, and then if you want the dimensionality, you then keep talking about your MD array, and if you just want to call fill, then you make the span and call fill.
Right, but that's recommending people do unsafe things to do something that's a kind of basic operation for the type.
I wouldn't call it unsafe. It's just it's projecting the data in a different way, but I wouldn't say it's unsafe in the way that we normally think of unsafe.
It's completely unsafe, and you can suddenly, even if it doesn't result in an access violation, you can still subtly corrupt your data. You can introduce security vulnerabilities and all kinds of stuff, simply because you are now no longer accessing the data in the way that it was intended. You're effectively taking a pointer to the data, doing a manual bounds check that is not the same as the original bounds checks, which can, like, if you're doing image processing, one of the most common things is people suddenly get the X wrong, and now they're overwriting the next row in the data and completely corrupting the image. Like, it is very unsafe to try and treat multidimensional memory as linear memory. And even though people do it, it is still, it's not a normal golden path scenario.
Okay, no, I get it. So it's causing people to think of it in a manner other than what it was intended to be thought of, and it's causing people to make incorrect decisions because of that, because of the way it's projected. Okay, yeah. So not unsafe in the typical sense, but unsafe in the sense that, like, you're probably doing something wrong. Okay.
We could define this as an extension method. That way it's not picked over the other one.
Can we just add overloads on the various arities?
I mean, adding it is like current array.fill has to be called statically. I think. I don't think it's an
Right.
instance method. It's array.fill.
Yeah, but so the consideration there is array, for historical reasons, has been a static class, and people who wanted to do operations on array had to explicitly call array dot method and pass in the array. With span, people now do array dot as span dot method. There's then an argument that if array as it exists today is problematic because of its definition, but we know that people want to be able to do things like array.fill and things like that, that we should push this proposal back, and we should come back with a separate proposal of what's basically new APIs on memory extensions, which basically expose it for array and multidimensional array. Then people can just do array.fill regardless of whether it is a single or multidimensional array.
Fair. Yeah, in my head, all that was happening was you were putting the word this in front of where it is right now, which actually wouldn't work since the class isn't static. But
right.
And so then it was going to be, well, sure, the one that you call with extension syntax was the MD array one, but the existing call would still be ambiguous. Yeah, I mean, so YouTube chat had a suggestion that I was waiting to bring up, but I'll bring it up now. Of, like, we could just do this if we just, like, change the word fill right? So fill multi-dimensional. Um,
That's then super inconsistent with all the other APIs on array.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Like it would fix it. It's just like fill itself is already inconsistent with the rest of the APIs on, because most of the APIs on array take system.array. They don't take t bracket close bracket.
Right. Yeah. Well, the other form of the question, amusingly, is the higher proposal of, and I think Levi just asked if maybe we should just make a rank 2, 3, and 4 overload and call it a day. But if you think that the answer is send this back and somebody should come up with extension methoding all of the static methods off of array and solving the problem there, then
Yeah,
sure.
I think the two like best approaches would be either just overload fill, take the minor source breaking change. That's then at least consistent with other APIs on array. Like binary search, for example, has overloads that take array and overloads that take T array. And so users can already hit the problem in other APIs on array of, long array and then zero literal, or various cases like that. So users can already hit this problem. We're just keeping array consistent with everything else. Or we say that array's kind of the wrong approach moving forward. We like the fact that they're instance methods, and so expose them as extensions, much like happens for span.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the binary search ambiguity was introduced in .NET Framework 2.0, which was itself already complicatedly breaking in many ways. So I agree that there's the possibility that it picks the wrong one, but there's not the same level of you've had this code now for 20 years and it now tells you, I'm sorry, you need to pick which overload you meant. And you're like, I don't understand the question. The one it picked yesterday.
If we just did the 2 error or the 2 rank overload, would that solve like 99% of the problems that people have?
It'd solve a good bit, and it would solve the cases where it's done for like image processing and stuff. It wouldn't solve the types of scenarios that people want to see for machine learning, AI, or higher kinded processing, where you may have 3, 4, or higher dimensional arrays, and where those may be common.
And they're setting the values to something other than default of T.
Mm-hmm. Because if you were just doing default of T, you'd use clear.
Right. Like I'm not opposed to adding the 2 rank overload just because it solves, I think, as we're all in agreement, a large percentage of the problems that people have. And it seems like it can be done without breaking anyone.
Yeah, I think if we were to do that, I'd want to kick it back and take a look at the extension method approach as kind of holistically. Because if we're going to start exposing, so if we expose fill two-dimensional T array, that will be the first explicitly two-dimensional array API we're exposing on system array,
Yeah.
which opens the floodgate in question of, do we need to be doing this more holistically? And so if we're going to take a holistic look at it regardless, then I'd like to take a look at the extension approach and see if we can do that because that solves the 99% case, makes it nicer without users having to explicitly ask span to access all these kind of core APIs they want anyways. And it then gives external libraries the ability to provide their own extension methods in the same pattern that don't conflict if they happen to need more than, however many dimensions we decide is the core number to support.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Memory what? Memory extensions?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right place to put them. If it was called span extensions, then I might think, we should define array extensions as well, but given it's just memory, it seems like putting the array ones there would be fine.
All right. So, sending it back with the suggestion to look into moving all of the static declared as static but really look like instance calls on array to be extension methods, so that you're able to lock in the type of the array better than locking in the type of the value.
Yeah.
It may still end up being a problem with long or double comma int, but
yeah, we can at least check that, and if it is, we can make the decision of, let's expose the two-dimensional case and give users a pattern for which they could define their own higher dimensioned extensions.
Right, and it would also be reasonable if we introduce them in the same time of like, yeah, sorry, this is ambiguous, you need to deal with it. But the problem that I have with the proposed static fill taking system array as the first parameter is it breaks existing code. New code's allowed to be ambiguous, but existing code is, more troublesome. Bloop. Prefer an analyzer to prefer task from result over task run. 67123. I'm guessing Steve?
Sure. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If someone is trying to create a new task with a known value, and they use task.run to return it rather than using task.from results, like, it should have just been the latter. It's fairly straightforward. I honestly don't know how often this actually happens. It must happen enough that various folks discussed it, but I almost never see this. So, but that said, I don't have a problem with it. It would basically just be calling task.run with a lambda or whatever, something that the compiler can see that is just a return for some value, in which case it should have just been task.fromResult.
Makes sense. So I guess it would just be detecting if it's a lambda that is only a return statement.
Basically. There are enough C# constructs that there might be some additional variations, but conceptually that's what it is.
Yeah. You'd probably want to limit it on returning literal, because if you're returning anything other than literal, there might be some weird side effects that the analyzer can't account for.
You know, like returning a captured local, you think would be weird?
Another thread could have mutated the captured local before the task runs. It could have an observable behavioral change.
Yeah,
Reliably?
but that's probably a bug.
Yeah.
Probably a bug, yeah. But
Like,
it
and
is
what
a
if you're
behavioral
just
change.
like, I guess a more common thing would be like people running other like methods, right, and doing unnecessary task.runs.
Yeah.
Like, but in that case,
I don't think the analyzer's gonna.
yeah,
That would be a lot. To interprocedural analysis would be a whole lot. At least from my perspective, a whole lot more pain than it's worth.
fair.
Yeah, because task.run of send nothing to go execute some other method is like, well, was the method expensive enough that you really did mean to background thread it?
Well, what I've seen in practice is people try to do this. People do this in order to isolate thread local changes that these methods make.
Right.
Because they don't want them to pollute the calling thread.
Right, but and yeah, so I guess it wouldn't just be just a return statement, because if it's return some other function call, it's probably not what you meant. But it feels like return from result on a param ref or a field ref or a local that's not itself an expression statement feels.
Definitely would not want to do anything that invoked arbitrary code. So no property access, no method access, nothing that would actually run anything. But field, I'd be fine if we. I mean, again, I don't know how often this actually comes up.
Yeah.
I almost never see it. So I don't know.
It
My care
can't be a
package is pretty
static
low.
field.
Yeah, can't.
Because a static field might have thread static on it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Like that's why I had suggested that it really should only be literals, because like you run into all these really weird edge cases once you extend beyond that.
The reason I'm so hesitant here is I think the number of things that this catches is so small that I already don't know that it's worth doing. But okay, some people think it is. Are they using literals? I don't know.
So I'm looking through all of the sources across all of DevDiv, and I see this pattern exactly once, and it's in a unit test.
Yeah. Out of sheer curiosity, is that one example across all of DevDiv in a unit test a literal or something else?
It's a literal return true.
What is the Twitter discussion that drove this? Or X discussion, I should say.
Yeah. I was, I don't know, insanity screening it before putting it on the stream, because who knows what people say in public. It doesn't.
It's just hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, so chat has basically pointed out this one of if I no, don't Don't do that. I declared the value in a local just immediately before this call, and now I'm just saying, like, I wanted to inspect it in a debugger, and now I want you to return it. Or I want you to wrap it in task.
Yeah, no,
So, like, that
It should
seems
have been-
safe to me. That should have
Yeah.
been just task from result.
it should have been passed from result. I just don't know who does that.
Yeah.
Is it a real thing?
People who don't understand task, which I think is most developers.
Yeah, but a lot of people, even if they don't understand task, how many like can you point to real examples where people are doing this and shouldn't have been?
I'm sure we can find plenty of examples on GitHub. Let me see if I can find any pretty quick. But like, I think this is kind of the same thing with a lot of our APIs. There's so many cases where people find something that works or find some post on Stack Overflow and just copy it without thinking if there's or even looking for if there's a better way to do it. I see that with the math APIs, with the perf APIs. I see it with numerics and intrinsics. I know I've seen it with threading and with tasks, with WinForms, etc. So I think that task.from result is just one more case that people would frequently miss.
That's fine. It just we don't have the cycles either development wise or in the IDE to run all of the analyzers to catch all those cases. So like there are an infinite number of possible mistakes people could make, and we want to write things to catch the most likely.
Yeah.
I'm fine if this is something that enough people are doing that it's valuable. I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah, because I can agree with the premise that
Sure,
that task
absolutely.
run should have been task from result, and Fowler's example, or from YouTube chat, Alex's example of I saved the value into a local and then Lambda returned the local also should have been from result. But I agree, this probably is not worth the CPU cycles it would spend looking for it. Like the 3 that it finds in a year weren't worth the hundreds of CPU hours it burned looking at everybody else's code.
I'm looking at grep.app. Most of the cases it hits are in tests, but not all. Many.
I've definitely seen it, like when people want to. Oh, sorry.
So I was just gonna say most are literals, true numbers, but there aren't that many even across all of grep.app. And some of the ones that are there in real code are properties, which I would be very hesitant to do. There were also ones. We'd also have to, if we did variables, we'd have to special case tasks because those have special meaning in task.run.
If the return type of the Lambda is itself task, it does something different.
Because it maps to the task.run overloads. That's either that's a func of task, in which case it doesn't return you a task of task. It returns you a task with the inner one unwrapped to the outer one. So that's some of the results that I see as well. I don't know. If we want to do this for literals, sure. Seems
like, are you saying based off what you've seen on grep.app now, you think that there are enough instances that looking for it for literals is worth the cost of finding them?
No, I'm just saying if everyone else wants it, I'm okay with it. But I wouldn't want to do it for methods or properties. For variables, we'd have to special case tasks to not do it for those. The majority of the ones that I see on grep.app, and it's hard to separate just flipping through, but most of the ones are literals. They're either numbers or constants or numbers or booleans. So if we wanted to do it just for literals and go from there, I guess we could. I don't know. I might care factors low.
Yeah, I'm browsing more repositories, and I don't see examples of this in practice.
Think of all the compute cycles we're wasting in tests.
Right, yeah. Like that's the
You're
thing,
right.
is,
We
like,
should
I
just
don't
stop running
imagine this
tests.
is going in per critical code, but I do think you'll notice that the previous version is slightly shorter than the suggested replacement, and I think in tests that's what some people care about. They want to get their task of thing, and task.run does it in the least characters.
So one thing that I actually do see quite often is people doing task.run like lambda to new whatever. So I see examples of people doing like new tuple, for instance. And I think that, I don't know, it runs into the same problem that I think Steve mentioned earlier about like, it would be safe to hoist these, but now we would need to do introspection of what these constructors are doing under the covers. Mm-hmm. And that seems like it would be far more useful, but we've already deemed it out of scope. So.
Yeah, like, we may have had previous examples of this, but I think that my vote is that this becomes our newest. The analyzer pattern it wants to detect is correct, but it's not worth the cost of detecting it.
Yeah.
That putting this analyzer in the analyzer's package will just slow builds down more than it will help the world.
I'm fine with that. If there's backlash and people can point to real places where this would have saved the environment, we can put it in.
Right.
So this is a little off topic, but yeah, I agree. Like it's fine in principle, but we not put in the effort. But the off topic question is like the other day I noticed like in my test, and it's possible that we just like disabled the right analyzer. I have a lot of string interpolations without any actual interpolation. And I was surprised that I didn't see any analyzer complaining at me.
What do you mean? You mean
like
dollar
a dollar sign with no slots?
Yeah, so I mean
the compiler recognizes that.
Yeah, it doesn't actually hurt anything.
Okay, so that's why we don't analyze against it, even though it's kind of a wasted character.
It's a wasted character. We just have never bothered. I mean, effectively, it's a style rule.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious.
There are analyzers I've seen in other analyzer packages that do detect that. But yeah, I'm more interested, honestly, in the opposite rule, which I think we actually approved, but no one's implemented, which is you should have had a dollar sign and you didn't. That's a real functional issue, which has bitten us multiple times. It's obviously also harder to implement.
I'm so reliant on things like tab completion that I immediately would notice that in my own code. I'd hit like the first letter of the variable or function name, hit tab, and then be like, why is this not working?
Oh, you mean if you had a regular string and you were trying to do... Yeah, I noticed it not because of tab, but because of colorization.
Right.
Okay.
But we've shipped multiple bugs that we've gone back and fixed where an exception message or something was included brace block close brace.
Does GitHub highlight it correctly yet? I mean, I know it colorizes in Visual Studio.
I don't know the answer to that. But for the most part, GitHub's colorization of C# isn't wonderful.
Yeah.
I blame Kevin.
What did Kevin say?
No, I just said I blame Kevin.
Oh, I blame Kevin.
Yeah.
He's watching the stream, so we can call him out, right?
Yeah, it's not Kevin's department as far as I know, but he's literally the only person I know at GitHub, so everything's his bug.
Kevin, don't listen to him. We love you.
Yeah, well, that's why we need to encourage him from. This is Kevin's bug, and Kevin can do better. No? Don't like my management style? Guess that's why I'm not a manager.
All right, so this one, I think there is value in. It is complicated. This does fall into the realm of interprocedural analysis. So it's one of those rules that would basically only run builds. You wouldn't see it show up in the ID because it's sort of whole project. But the idea is if you have methods that aren't exposed out of your assembly that are returning, like async methods that are returning task of T, and all the callers are just, they're not doing anything with the task, they're just awaiting the results of the method directly, then there's a really good chance that value task would help you out, because you'll avoid a task allocation when the method completes synchronously, just doing nothing else. And it won't change. In those situations, no changes are actually required at the call site. We're just validating effectively that no changes are required at the call site. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that we will often sort of do manually. Anytime we look at a new library and we're trying to improve it, we'll look for task-based APIs where we're the only consumers and all the consumers are just awaiting, and there's a value being returned. We'll change them to be value task. I think it's valuable enough to do, but it is one of our, would be more of, I think, one of our more expensive analyzers.
So it sounds like you said we have a concept of analyzers that only run over the final build and not kind of.
Yeah, so for example, we added an analyzer earlier this release that recommends changing types of fields or return types of methods where you're returning an interface or a base abstract class or something, where you could avoid virtual or interface dispatch if you changed it to be the concrete derived type. So you're returning iList of T and you could have used list of T. But that requires looking at all the call sites of every method to determine whether it makes sense. And the analyzers have a concept of sort of running locally or globally across the project. And the ones that run sort of more locally can be run as part of, just typing. But the ones that are more global end up getting, we structure them in a way where they only run as part of sort of the full build, where they can be passed the whole compilation and look at it.
But when you hit Control-Shift-B or F5 or whatever causes a build to happen, the squiggles will still show back up. It'll unify the typing thing with the full build thing. Okay.
Right. Oh, that's true for Control-Shift-B. For F5, I think we actually disable all analyzers by default in VS when you have F5.
Fair enough.
I think. I can be wrong.
Right, so the analyzer wouldn't suggest changing a task to value task if you have a public method that then has done some other work and then has returned this helper method that is task, because it would need the call site would need to change to .as task when doing that.
My default for this would basically be, if we can see all the callers of the method, which by definition means it's not public, and we can look at all the callers and see that they're not actually using task at all. They're just awaiting the thing that's returned, such that it doesn't matter what awaitable you return. Then we can easily change the return type of the method to value task and save some allocation in some cases.
And yeah, YouTube chat asks, would this also take virtual methods and their totality into account?
It's a good question. We could say we start with the answer of no to keep things simpler. We could also certainly do it. It just makes it more complicated.
Yeah, that sounds like the I have a feeling that type of question comes up a lot when we talk about like whole project analyzers. Like, what if there's internals visible to? Like, what if this thing is on an internal interface and so on? But I feel like we actually have a pretty good grasp of those difficulties at this point.
Yeah, so for internal visible to, where we've gravitated towards is by default, internals visible to disables these kinds of analyzers for internals, not for private. But then for the rules where that happens, there's an opt-in mechanism where you can say, pretend internal visible to wasn't there and still proceed to do the analysis that you were doing. And if any bugs result, that's on me.
Yeah, this seems viable. What platforms is value task available on?
All of them, because it's available in an out-of-band NuGet package.
Okay, so that means that if I have my project cross-targeting multiple different platforms, everything will still work.
Yeah, and obviously the rule would only fire if it saw a value task defined in your compilation unit, or a reference from your compilation unit.
Right, but if you are multi-targeting, then it could run in the net core version, and then you change the code, and then now it says your netfx version doesn't compile, and you have to go add the reference to task.
Basically all the analyzers that are looking for APIs we've added in the last decade. If you're multi-targeting and the API is available in one and not the other, you end up getting
sad.
Right.
I was just clarifying the while it is available on all platforms, if you're multi-targeting, there is still a world that you now get told your code doesn't compile, and it's just that you need to add the NuGet package reference.
There is such a world.
Yeah.
But you're better off here than others because there actually is an OOB package available for it.
Right.
Yeah. As long as it's easy for people to figure out like how to fix themselves if that happens, then it shouldn't be a huge problem. I have a feeling that as soon as they see that error, they'll like throw it into a search engine, and the first match will be install this package.
Yeah, and if this warning's only going to fire if value task is available, if they're multi-targeting, I think there's a really good chance that if they're doing anything async, they already have this package referenced either directly or indirectly, because so many things now use value task. But I could be wrong. And as you say, it's easy to work around.
Yeah. Well, I think you would have to have a direct reference in your project just to consume the type, right? Like an indirect, a transitive dependency. I don't think will bring it in.
Is that true? I thought it did. I could be wrong.
I would need to double check myself. Regardless, like this seems like a good rule for analyzer, which means it has an associated fixer, right?
Yeah, fixer for this. The fixer for this would be strangely easier than the analyzer. Often the fixer is more complicated, but I think this is one where it would be much easier.
Prepend value, call it a day.
Exactly.
Yeah, love it. Okay, random question. Do you need to account for somebody pointing a delegate at this function, and now you're changing the function signature, and now other parts of the application might break?
Yeah, that would rule it out. So that's an example of it being used somewhere where it's not just invoked and the result. Okay. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one sentence pitch is if no code other than the return type would have to change.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Now we could certainly, if we found it to be valuable and there were other important cases, we can always expand it further. But I think that's the 90%, biggest bang for the buck. Or biggest bang for the $100.
Yeah. We're approving an analyzer that says you should use value test more.
I saw that. I
He was
assume it's
excited about it. He opened the issue, so.
Does it run ChatGPT, and does it ask Stephen Tobe whether that's okay?
Stephen GPT. -3.
Well, I see that this issue was open in March 2020, and nothing else was happening at that month. So I didn't know if this was just Emo having a wild hair because the world was on fire.
I think actually Emo went on an opening spree here after we had a brainstorming session about reinvigorating static analysis and coming up with a laundry list of things we might want, and then he took on the burden of creating all the issues.
Is he also taking on the burden of fixing them or addressing the issues? Did he?
I think you're confusing PM with engineering. We just have opinions. We don't do work, actually.
Hey, I would just take off a day or two of work and just listen to you opine for a day or two a week. That could be my 20% time.
I mean, that's basically what API reviews is, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask, how's that different than this meeting?
Sure.
All right, so I got the internal visible to that virtuals are probably too hard to tackle in V1, and the one sentence description of what it applies. Is there anything else that we want written for posterity?
It's part and parcel to if any code would have to change, but this is purely about async methods, not just one's returning task, because the reason I say it's part of that rule is if it's not async, then the code and the body of the method would actually have to change.
I mean, this might be a dumb question, but how does anybody assess that?
Well,
Whether
I think
async is in the signature.
Yeah, if it's an async state machine method, then changing the return type would change which async state machine generator gets used, and that's really what it's going after, I think.
Whereas if the difference between difference between internal async task and internal task. Right, if it's internal task, then you're providing the implementation, which means you're working with tasks directly and returning them. Recommending changing that to be value task, meaning we're saying, we analyzed the full body of your method and we know it makes sense for you to return a value task. Go figure out how. Whereas if it's async task, you literally prepend value and the compiler does the right thing.
Yeah, I know that in FDG, I essentially recommend that nobody ever write public async because of the way that you're supposed to do argument validation outside the state machine. But that people probably don't do that with internals, so. Because I was
internals we'd have no way to know. Plus, for the pattern that we're talking about here, it doesn't matter. Because if all the call sites are just being directly awaited,
right,
then there's no visible difference other than in the exceptions stack trace as to how it was thrown out of the method.
Right, and so if it's not going to look at I'm not an async state machine, I do something simple, and simple's now hard to describe, and then return something else. So that would block the pattern because you would have somewhere said, nope, I needed a reference type task, and then the analyzer's just not going to be smart enough to see that you could have done it. Yeah, that's fine.
Right. Yeah. The analyzer is basically find all async methods that are returning task of T, find all of their call sites. If all of their call sites call the method as part of an await expression, recommend changing the result from task of T to value task of T.
All right. Category is performance. And level is
Info.
okay. So, given that this is a big, beefy, expensive thing, is info a good level?
Yes.
Okay. Like, because it was, you can say you don't want it warning because you think it'll be too noisy for people, and then the question is info even giving them actual value, or should it be none and you just have to go opt into it and turn it on? Because I assume things that are none that don't even get run.
Things that are none don't get run.
Yeah. Things
Things that are hidden don't get run. Well, they do get run, but on demand, sort of. I think info is fine.
Okay, because that'll give the
It's
blue line or a ... or something, right?
Yeah, but because of how this analyzer will be structured, it won't actually run in the as part of the build. It'll as part of the IDE. It'll only end up running on builds,
Right.
actual builds, not design time builds.
If you happen to, you hit Control Shift B and you happen to be looking at internal async task of whatever,
Then you get a swiggle.
where whatever is not bool, then
Yeah.
then you'll see like, hey, I have a suggestion for you, and
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, all right, yeah. My alternative wasn't warning; it was none. But if you think there's goodness in having it there, and maybe somebody notices a squiggle, then
I think it's good at info. I want people to know about this one. I think this one will actually affect meaningful change.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else?
Awesome. I want to point out we have some reps from the JSON team in review now. So we could, if we want, look at the JSON items.
Well, but there was the suggestion that they're trying to solve the problem without actually needing API. So I don't think.
No, I mean there were a few other issues I meant in here that were JSON related.
We haven't made it to them yet.
No, it's given the time zone difference, it's just difficult for them to be here as conveniently. That's all. Anyway.
Oh, I see. I think it'll be next after this, but because this is just the last item off of Emo's warning of these are going to be the top of the agenda. So,
yep.
All right, task wait all is missing an IEnumerable of task overload 34106. Presumably there's a proposal somewhere. Nope. Steve just trusts me to write it on the fly.
Yeah, there's an overload of task.waitAll that takes the params of task. There's an overload of task.whenAll that takes an IEnumerable of task. The request here is to add an overload of task.waitAll that takes an IEnumerable of task.
Should wait any also gain one?
Probably.
Because when all and when any both have one, but wait all and wait any don't.
Yeah, we added them when we added when any. When any came later. We didn't have them for the wait ones. We added them when we added the when ones. So I think this is basically requesting that we do it for the wait ones as well. And yeah, it would cover both all and any. It's
So,
a convenience thing. That's all.
question about wait any. Would it abort the enumeration if it detects that a task within the enumeration is finished?
We could do that. We could. There's currently some error validation that happens to check whether the enumerable gave you back. Yeah, if he gave you a null, then it throws an exception. But I don't want to prioritize validation over performance here. So if we could certainly check and just return it immediately if we found one. It'd be okay.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that like whatever behavior we choose, we just have to make sure we never change it going forward, because it would be a breaking change.
I think short circuiting would be fine.
Yeah. It's just if we short circuit now, we have to short circuit for all time, and if we don't short circuit now, we can never short circuit again. Like it's just one of those things, right?
Yeah, I think short circuiting would be fine for any. Obviously, it doesn't make sense for all.
Right.
Yeah, and you. So task.waitall is params?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Emo, you don't write down params. Because it says it's not. Or rather, doesn't say it is.
Interesting.
But it does say not null twice. Something.
That one can't be, that one can't be. And that one says params. Alright.
What was it? Wait all?
Task.waitall that only takes an array.
Yeah, the not null indication is because the task is not null and the array is not null. But
So we're looking for the params indicator here.
Right.
yeah.
This is task not question mark.
Bracket not question mark. Yeah.
Yeah, bracket not question mark. Yeah.
Sounds like Jeremy, you should submit a PR.
Oh yeah, there's an open issue of support params.
Probably from the last time this came up.
April apparently.
Fair enough. So should other do all of these other variants apply?
I mean, they all could. That's why I'm sort of lukewarm on this. I don't really want to add 6 more overloads for IEnumerable, but I don't care. There's already too many APIs here.
I mean, I would be willing just to simplify and say the only one we care about is cancellation token, because it's easy enough to make a cancellation token from a timeout.
So add one overload that's IEnumerable with a cancellation token that's defaultable.
Yeah.
If we care about the cancellation token, what I'm suggesting is if we care about the other overloads, only target the cancellation token one, not the others.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, we could also do milliseconds timeout and default it to -1 if we wanted, but
We have a timeout.infinite constant.
But that would just be past cancellation token .none.
right. Well, I'm just looking at like we have the wait all that has a milliseconds timeout and a cancellation token. So is it do we want to make it be that one, or do we want to just say if you want timeout, do cancellation token source from timeout.token?
Right.
That requires a using.
I would suggest that.
That requires a using, so nobody will do it, right? That's the only word that can go there. right. And so, Steve, as Mr. Task, you think this is the right signature? We don't care about the timeout one?
I want to say no, except I also don't want to have this conversation again. Let me look at the implementation. Hold on. I kind of want to do whatever's easiest. So, if it's not going to add a lot of complexity, I don't know. Just to avoid things being supported in one overload and not the other, let's just add the milliseconds timeout to both.
Okay. And wait has the same pattern? Sorry, the any has the same pattern?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that either of them will end up being used, either of the arguments, but just in the name of completeness. I guess the downside, though, there's the downside of the milliseconds timeout, which is that's sort of the rare case. The more common case would be that you have a cancellation token, and now we force you to write cancellation token : cancellation token.
Good enough for me.
Yeah, let's just stick with this.
Is cancellation token more common than a time-based timeout nowadays?
Definitely. Often the cancellation token will be sourced from something related to a timeout, but you end up passing the cancellation token down through arbitrary numbers of APIs, and it's the initial call site somewhere off wherever that created it with a timeout involved. But each API isn't keeping track of the timeout on their own. They're just registering with the cancellation token or just passing the cancellation token down.
Oh yeah. I guess I was under the impression that like wait any and wait all would tend to be at the top layer rather than the bottom layer.
I mean, hopefully wait all and wait any aren't being used much anymore anyway, because they're synchronous. And I don't even know if we have when all, when any overloads that take cancellation tokens.
You're correct.
Which I think there's another issue for.
Yes, the wins appear to be not cancelable.
Yeah, I think we've had some requests for the wins to be cancelable, but I think there might be an open issue for it. But yeah, I would expect that. I mean, if you're doing wait, you're doing synchronous stuff. It's more likely to be sort of at the top of your invocation than at the bottom, because you're launching a whole bunch of tasks and then joining on them. But
yeah, when any being cancelable kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit, but yeah, because now you have all these tasks that are still running in the background, and when do you dispose of the resources that they're using? Who knows?
Yeah. It's complicated. It's one of the reasons as well that it took us so many years to add we added in .NET 6 the wait async method, which allows you to pass a cancellation token. So basically you're canceling the wait, not the actual operation. And so people need to, like, it's something people need to do, but they also need to realize that they're canceling the await. The original operation might be still off and running and doing stuff with resources. And they need to adapt to that.
And that was also true with the wait int or wait all / wait any with a timeout, right? It,
Yeah, that's why
it,
it returned a
it,
bool, right?
it aborts the iteration, not the.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
tasks.
and same with cancellation token fees. You're canceling wait all and wait any. You're not affecting the tasks in any way.
Right.
Just the waiting.
Cool. All right, so we happy with what's on screen?
Ship it in .NET 9.
Yes, we're happy.
All right. JSON content that create overloads that accepts JSON type info 51544. Someone thinks we're smart enough to see a non-top post proposal.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that. So if I recall correctly, this API proposal concerns adding functionality related to source gen support that wasn't added for the JSON content class. So it proposes adding these two additional create method overloads that accept JSON type info that let users, well, construct JSON content instances using the source generator.
So is this going in system.net?
Correct. Yeah, that's part of the systemnet http.json library.
All right. I mean, I can see that there's a syntax error that the first one should have been over t value, but I'll fix that.
Yeah.
JSON content.
So
So
there's an existing overload create that takes t value, media type, header value, JSON serializer options. Okay.
Right.
So this is inserting JSON type info before all the other optional parameters.
Correct.
That makes sense.
This is more or less following practice in all the other serialized overloads that we have in both system.json and this library. And the reason it's there is because the defaults in any overload that accepts JSON serializer options is configured in a way that makes it impossible to work in native AOT. So by exposing these overloads, it makes it possible to both consume source generators and also do so without giving out any false positive linker warnings.
Yeah, it follows like the same pattern as like your read from JSON and so forth as well. Seems logical.
Wait, so you would leave off the JSON serializer options?
Yeah, the JSON serializer options in this case would be encapsulated by the type info instance you're providing. So all configuration, your entire source of truth is within that token.
Right. So it's replacing both the type parameter for the non-generic overload and the serializer options.
Correct. Yeah.
I forgot the factory for JSON type info. Yeah, it takes the serializer options. Okay, this makes sense then.
First .NET 9 API approved. Woohoo! For system.json at least.
Yeah, I mean, we've already approved things that already had a label of 9, so you definitely don't win that award.
Ooh.
Alright, so previously it was input value, input type, media type, and now it's input value, type info, media type. And then in the object. So in the non-generic overload, you call it type info, and in the generic one, you call it JSON type info.
Good catch. I'm not sure how that happened. Both should have been JSON type info, I think.
Okay. Any other feedback?
What JSON type info targets all the same runtimes and frameworks as system HTTP JSON, right? So we don't have to have like if-defs here anywhere.
No,
Okay.
it should be available everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Requires location attribute for ref read only parameters 85910. I'm surprised this is floating. Was ref read only parameters punted out of this release?
So no, it's happening in this release, but this is about adding the attribute to the compiler generates it if it's not available. So our adding it is basically just saving it from being in every assembly that uses it and putting it into the core. And we basically agreed when we last discussed this that we would give things the time to bake and then add it kind of in the next iteration of the libraries. So, once C#12 is shipped and is generating this attribute, then in .NET 9, we can put it into the core library such that it stops generating it into any assembly that uses it. We also expect that, unlike some of the other attributes which show up in basically every assembly, this one will be a lot less common. So it's not like something we need to rush in.
Okay, so it's intentionally not 8, and it's ready for review because it's currently not waiting on anything, but it's not ready to do.
Right. We this is the shape that we are 95% sure the compiler is going to ship with, and we'll wait for the compiler to actually ship with it, and then we can put it in.
Okay. I mean, if this is the shape, I think we could say that it's approved, and then just go ahead and mark it blocked and say it needs to wait for next version for the compiler team to be sure that that's what they want the public to be. Or we can just ignore it today.
If it's just wait for .NET 9, that's sufficient.
Yeah. Because it's in compiler services, it's sealed. It says a thing that's not. If it's confusing, I don't know what it would be doing that's confusing me, and so it seems I've got no feedback. Oh. And they should have got more red during the meeting.
Also, did someone just double check that exactly matches what the compiler emits?
I mean, if it comes time to implement it and the compiler has changed it, then we'll deal with that then.
Okay. Sure, fair enough.
Alright, allow specifying an indent size and a whitespace character when writing JSON with UTF-8 JSON writer 63882.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that again. So the issue is what it says. Users want to be able to specify the indentation character and the number of indentations, both on the UTF-8 JSON writer layer via the JSON writer options struct, or via the serialization layer on JSON serializer options. The API as proposed lets users specify a char and the number of indentations, but I believe, and I need to open the issue on my side, there has been some feedback recently, and I unfortunately need to look it up at the moment. But if you could scroll down to the final comments in the API.
Did we approve it previously?
Sorry, I'm just trying to remember what happened.
I think it had been suggested in one shape. It came to API review. API review completely changed the shape when Eric wasn't in the room, and then afterwards, both Eric and some community members basically said, why did these changes get made? These don't make sense."
Yeah. Yeah, it's come back to me. I think there were a few voices saying that they didn't feel like the shape as approved would be a great design. And there are a few examples as to why that might be. So, like, for example, I think this example that I wrote kind of tries to make that point, I guess. It seems that just setting an integer might be easier in this case. I don't know. I just thought we might want to reconsider here.
Right. So, yeah, the notes that we wrote down here are, it doesn't allow for somebody doing something fancy with, like, arrows, and it doesn't allow anything that requires a surrogate pair. So you've said nobody can indent with emoji or Japanese.
That's fine, because that's illegal JSON.
Fair enough. Is there any
only 4 characters? The JSON spec only allows 4 characters: space, tab, character return, line feed. That is it. That is the entire sum total of what's allowed in there.
The spec also doesn't allow lots of things that people use in JSON in practice. So,
yes,
like comments.
Yes, but we don't. We're not in the business of providing a facility to do that, and in fact, the JSON reader and writer APIs do not support any of that by default.
Right, they require you to opt in, but is there any reason why we can't?
Also forbid. Like the JSON reader, for instance, forbids page separator and line separator as white space in comments. It is absolutely forbidden, and there's no option to turn it on. The threat model that we produced explains why we did that without a vacuum path switch.
Yeah.
I will say the emojis and stuff and the mixed spaces, which I guess would be technically legal by JSON spec if I wanted to mix tabs and spaces together in one prefix. No, seem pretty marginal. So I'm okay with the original proposal if that's what Team of Plenty wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, should we go to the route of the enum if there are only 2 or 3 or 4 characters that are allowed? But it turns out people can pass in enum values that aren't actually named, so you'd have the exact same check. So just throwing on "I don't like this char" seems
I would expect
Fine.
the property setter to validate the char that you're trying to set it.
Sure. All right, so that seems fair. But now we're in a newer world. Does this require changing anything for the generator attribute? Because I feel like serializer options and the generator attribute are now tightly coupled.
That is a good point. I think the attribute should have a corresponding pair of properties added as well.
All right. Does anybody know where the attribute is? Or
It's under serialization, so system text JSON.serialization, and the name of the attribute is JSON source generation options attribute.
and then it just gains the exact same two things?
Yep. So I think that's using the enum variant as opposed to the char variant.
Yeah.
And is that going to throw if an invalid character is passed in?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean
And
the attribute
is size
won't, but
going?
hydrating it will.
Is size going to be a confusing term? I feel like size isn't the word we normally use. It's normally like count or length or explicitly like character count, but
So I'm
char count or something like that.
I'm checking the names of the corresponding APIs in JSON.NET for reference.
Like what do we
But
call
I
it in
think
XML writer?
you're right that count sounds more correct than size.
It's like
Yeah, I
XML
think
writer
with
and code
IDEs
DOM
it's
both have it.
Yeah. We've seen it called width before as well.
Yeah, I feel like with code DOM it's shift width or something. Or no, that's what it's called in VI. Never mind. Shift width is when you hit tab, how many characters does it shift? We could call it shift width, and only Jared and I would know how to use it. Right.
For reference, in JSON.NET, it's called, the integer is called indentation, and the char is called indent char.
I don't like it.
Yeah, I see indent size used in diagnostics.
Yeah, the thing that I'd be most concerned about is someone like a lot of APIs that have indent that I've worked with, when they have these two things, they basically have the indent string and then the level of indentation that you're currently at. And so some people might think that, you increase your indentation by doing indent size plus plus. And I'm just wondering if there's something more clear, especially since size isn't like the normal terminology we use in other APIs to indicate how many of something there is.
I mean, the clearest thing is to have an actual string, which is this is the indentation text.
That's what we had previously.
Which was what was approved.
And then they didn't like that.
Right. Which it could be trivially validated as well.
Right. Like, why was that seen as a bad thing?
I think because he, instead of writing new string of
space
quote
8.
space quote comma 8, he wrote it
Yeah.
out, and it's like, well, now this is hard to count.
Yeah, but don't write it like that.
I mean, if you're expressing it in terms of a character and an integer, why not make that the first class API?
Because we can't name the integer.
I mean, that you're assuming that someone's expressing it as a character and an integer. I mean, a string could literally be environment.newline. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. Like, just to confirm, we're okay with forbidding people from doing like carriage return line feed as the indentation text, right?
I'm just imagining the document in my head, just like all the new lines. Anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah. So like indented text writer takes tab string as a constructor parameter, and then it has a settable property indent, which is how many times should it write it down the next time you call, or the next time you start a line. But so that one's about the state of the indentation, like Tanner brought up previously. It's not how do I build the thing that I'm indenting with. They took a string, and so just give me the thing that you want to write down every time we start a line. And honestly, that's probably, if I'm the one who thought of the arrow, that's probably what I was thinking of, was just indented text writer. Of not all indentations are white space, but I agree in the context of JSON. You're producing JSON, so it should look like JSON.
I mean, if you want to be verbose, indent character count.
Yeah, I mean, I think like indent length is okay. Indent character count is certainly verbose enough.
Also, because it's on the options class.
I'll write both of these here and see what people think.
Yeah, because it's on the options class, I don't necessarily think people are going to get confused by the whole plus plus thing that Tanner had brought up. It is a good point, but I would imagine that type of bug would take place within the writer, not within the person constructing this and then passing it in.
Yeah.
we're the BCL. We can just lean into our overly verbose name. It's very clear. Indent character count. No, I mean,
it's a thing you only write once.
Writing a lot either.
Yeah,
exactly. It's like I actually don't hate it in this case. It's probably my favorite of the two options.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a fourth one, which would be width, but
yeah,
I didn't have a fourth class to edit, so.
But then is it visual width or what?
The other thing to keep in mind is that the existing property is right indented, the Boolean property. This would not show up clustered with that because this begins with an I instead of a W.
Right, but it does show up clustered with indent character, which is probably more important, unless you're suggesting we rename both.
Well, do you, does
right
setting
indent
the indent character to something automatically set right indented to true?
I hope not, because setting a property is not supposed to change another property.
Yeah, because it sounds like you would actually set these three properties together. So presumably you would want them to be named clustered together, right?
So you want right indent character count?
Maybe. It's verbose, but at least they're together. And it makes it clear to callers that these three things are tightly coupled.
Yeah. Does JSON serializer option right indented start as true or false?
False.
Yeah, that does seem... I mean, on the one hand, maybe people need to be, if you try writing an indent character and you set an indent character and indent character count, and you run your thing, and it's not indented, then Stack Overflow will probably quickly tell you need to set right indented to true. But if we want to stick
ChatGPT, Bing. No, yeah, I mean, people will figure it out.
if we want to stick right in front of everything, here I'll doodle that too.
It comes down to like how much pain are customers going to feel if they set like indent character to tab and then nothing gets written at all. Like, is it easy to discover the problem and the solution? If the answer is yes, and it's not a huge issue.
I think so. Like, as much as I like, tabbing my way to glory, like I concern more about the readability, and like, you're usually starting from something. You know what I mean? Like, when it's possible that someone was just like scrolling through all the JSON serializer options and saw right indented and didn't see the other things, but I think more often they're like looking at some other code that set up indentation.
And this, like, honestly, this isn't a huge inconvenience, but death by 1,000 cuts is a thing.
Yeah.
So.
I don't like prefixing it with right.
Okay.
That's my vote personally, but like I see the point a little bit, but I think most people will be able to find it pretty easily. I don't think it adds too much value.
Yeah, Chad actually points out that right indent character sounds more like a method name than a property name.
Yeah. So it sounds like that first one is the one that's kind of getting the votes.
Because really, the English there I think should be the written indent character, which is...
Yeah.
Okay, so...
You did say it, but even worse. It's even worse.
Yeah.
So it defaults to space and 4.
Right, so the JSON source generation options, I mean, I guess they can default to whatever it is they want, but so I thought I saw somewhere in the proposal that if they were both 0 valued, that it would mean do whatever the system wants to do. Sorry, for each of them, if it's 0 valued, it's do whatever the system wants to do. But
I do not think that.
Yeah, it does seem like maybe the answer is just initialize them to space and either 2 or 4, whatever the answer was. For the attribute, that is harder.
For the attribute, I wouldn't concern myself too much because that's read by Roslyn only, and so it will only have effect if the user is explicitly setting a value to either of these properties. So I wouldn't concern myself with the default values in that particular case.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember what we decided before with another value type on the property on the attribute, but like, do we want to make these nullable so that you can tell the difference between set it and didn't, or do we just say for the attribute 0 probably means they didn't set it?
So this discussion came up last time too. Like, if you're looking at an attribute, there are ways in the attribute metadata to determine if something was set versus not.
Okay, that sounds familiar. So yeah, look at that instead of the hydrated value, if you care.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to leave the implementation note that they should be defaulted to the system defaults and should consider 0 to be an invalid value?
Do we default other things on there? We don't default max depth, do we? Even though we technically have a default max depth.
Right. Well, because that's, I think, where I remember seeing it is it said it wanted to treat it like max depth, where 0 meant system you're allowed to have an opinion, and I don't care what that opinion is.
That seems like a weird decision.
Yeah. To match
Like
the behavior of max depth, the default of the null char and the 0 length would represent fallback values.
I do not like that. Like, I don't even like the existing max depth behavior. Like, it shouldn't lie. It should just tell you it's 64.
Fair enough. So
I consider the max depth thing to be a design error, and that we shouldn't propagate that forward here.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Like, I guess the advantage is you can check, was this changed even in the event we change the default at some future point, but
we're not going to.
it
We can't.
It doesn't seem worthwhile. Yeah.
And if we change the default, then this would be a good way to determine what the default is.
Right?
Yeah. We should also, and by we I mean someone who's not me, should file a bug to fix the max depth thing as well.
I guess the other thing is if you just want to set it back to the default, not knowing what it is, but
yeah.
I mean, would we be able to enforce this for the case of the struct?
What do you mean?
I see. So right. So for the struct, the problem would be you say new writer options, right indented true, and now it says, sorry, you didn't tell me how fat the character needs to be. So the struct does need to say that 0 is system default.
Sorry, what struct are we talking about here?
JSON writer options. Which presumably shouldn't have been a struct because it has way too much stuff on it.
Yeah.
Oh, right, this is a thing as well.
No, it does look like mostly it's hiding it in the single int. So, but this it can't. Like the char, it could compress into a 2-bit field, but the count is gonna increase the size.
Even
of the
if it can't, even if it can't compress it, it can remove the allocation and then hide it away internally using birefs.
I don't think they can avoid increasing the size of the struct from 2 ints to 3.
No, but they can internally pass it around using a ref.
To avoid the copies. You mean?
You can avoid increasing the size of the struct.
If they put some very tight limits on the size of the character count, yeah.
It would need to be 64 or fewer. Or 63 or fewer. That's doable.
They have 2 int fields currently that are bit vectors. Sorry, one's a bit vector and the other's max depth.
I mean, if you wanted to get down to it, you could say that as long as the character count is 63 or fewer, then you can smuggle both the character data and the character count in an 8-bit value. So there you go. It's leaking implementation details, but it's whatever.
Yeah, I mean they can upper bound it if they want.
Yeah.
Right. So we can't actually say this because 0 needs to work in the struct.
Honestly, you should probably upper bound it anyway, because otherwise your multiplication is going to have to be checked in the writer.
Yeah. Well, what's a good upper bound?
63.
Wouldn't it be 62? Aren't there 4 valid characters?
You have 6 bits for the length, and then 2 bits for the character. Yeah.
Oh, right. Just but 0 is invalid, so you get to add 1. So 64 would be the biggest number you could specify.
I mean, yeah, we're kind
Alright.
of just being silly at this point, but like
Yeah.
putting a reasonable max limit on it would not be a bad idea because it probably saves you from having to do checks elsewhere in the code.
So actually, why can't 0 be treated as default? So you've got two fields here. So if the indent character is 0, that means default indent character because the null character is otherwise invalid. And therefore indent character count being 0 can be treated also as default. But if it is any other character, then you can represent it as any value. Because if it's something else, you wouldn't necessarily want it to be 0 anyway. So between the two, you have the ability to track the defaultable state.
I guess that's yeah. All right, so that's very true. The indent character, especially because they're not going to store it as a unique char, they're going to fold it into the bit mask they already have. They just need to interpret, or 0 just needs to come back as space from their storage.
But that's an implementation detail, though.
Right. But that means
how it's
that you would know that when if you say default JSON writer options and read indent character, the get, like you don't see a field there. You're calling a get method, and it would return space because the
Right.
backing storage would say 0, so the property would return space.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
similarly, character count needs to understand that 0 means 2 or 4 or whatever the right answer is.
Yes.
Yeah. So the storage of 0 needs to be the system default, but the property read needs to understand that 0 is should not be returned. Okay. Wow. Structs. They require thinking.
Yeah. And there was also in YouTube chat, someone had pointed out that it is technically sensible for an indent count of 0 and for right indented to be true. Because all that means is that you would get new lines without any indentation.
Indented adds new lines?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's true. Yeah. All right. So
I don't know why anyone would do that, but it is a sensible thing, isn't it? It makes technical sense.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, if I set indented to right indented to true, and I don't touch the character account, what's the default today? It's 4 spaces or something?
I would need to check, but I think it's 2 spaces.
2 spaces. So if I changed it to a tab, would it automatically go to a single tab even if I don't touch the character count?
I think it would go to two tabs.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I was wondering. Okay. Like I was like, because an argument for having 0 just means the default number, right? Is that if you switch from spaces to tabs, you could have like different defaults. If 0 just meant the default for like whatever the character was.
Yeah, we have special case characters, but
yeah, but like I could see if someone just wanted to switch to tabs, like they probably want 1 tab per indentation, right? Like you could make that just work.
I mean, this is all an argument for having a string property.
Yep.
Because it's completely unambiguous at that point.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And then you also have null means whatever the system decides is the default, even if we want to change it later.
Yeah.
And honestly, the JSON string, the JSON serializer is probably going to want to create a cache string behind the scene anyways.
Oh yeah.
Because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
going
yeah.
to. So we should really just say the community's wrong here. It should be string, honestly. We can validate that it's correct. We can validate it that it's correct, but string makes the most sense from supporting defaultables, not having ambiguities, having something that the JSON serializer can use behind the scenes without having to introduce its own allocation, etc.
So from what I gather, one of the reasons that was not that it was seen as bad is because it would be difficult to use span.fill under the covers. And now we would have to say, okay, we're writing out this series of bytes like every single time there's an indentation level scene. Granted, that can be optimized. It can always be turned into like an integer right under the covers, but it wouldn't be .fill, so it wouldn't be vectorized. And people apparently care about that.
But the JSON writer can trivially cache and track the two most common string types for indentation and optimize it. Like,
Yes.
it's not
Yes, of
going to
course.
prevent the implementation.
Yeah.
I'm gonna save these notes.
And of course, there's span.copy. There's span.copy otherwise, which is functionally what it would be for the span or for the string case.
Yeah. So is there really a good argument against using string? Because like open quote /t close quote, new string open parens, apostrophe space apostrophe comma 8 close parens.
Which we
just
already
allow you
optimized internally.
Yeah.
to multiply strings and integers too. Like while we're at it, we can be like a scripting language. And then you have super nice syntax. You don't even have to do like new string space comma 8 or whatever. No, but I do find it hilarious that after 45 minutes of discussion, Tanner comes out. It's like, no, it's the children. I mean, the community who is wrong.
I mean, at this point, I think if I were to kind of nitpick about the single string property, it's probably the only thing I see at the moment is that it is going to be more non-trivial to validate. And I'm not sure if that would be a source of concern in practice. Like it.
I mean, you have to.
Yeah,
For each char C in the string, is it one of these 4 things?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally just, at least in .NET Core, it is
Index
string
of any
dot
except.
contains
Index of
any
any.
except.
Yeah.
Well, we
okay.
have contains any except now.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So contains any except, that's a vectorized lookup if the
Okay.
string's long enough to vectorize. And yeah.
Yeah.
Would we need to
we've got,
perform
like, 2
any other
characters
form of
left.
validation? Like, as long as it's just a combination of the allowed characters in whitespace, then we're happy?
Maybe length we were talking about earlier. But
Yeah, like
I mean,
the one thing it doesn't catch is if the user decides to create a string that's like tab space space tab. But do we really care if someone
No.
decides to?
No.
You
did it to
be
yourself.
optimized on the back end as well. You can pretty easily optimize writing out any string 4 characters or less. Like I said, you would turn it into an int under the covers and then call memory marshal.write, and then just bump the pointer however many characters it actually was.
Should
this is
this
all-
now? Sorry. Should this now be called indentation? Going back to the original discussion.
no. Just my opinion. Like, or written indentation. Like, no. Indent text is clear.
Okay. Second question: should that property be kept in sync with the write indented property? It seems that, setting write indented to true.
So the default
essentially
rule is no property assignment should ever change any other property.
Yeah.
That's the starting. Oh God, do not make object initializers harder than they are rule. Properties are independent.
Completely
So-
agreed. In old SimilarR, we tried doing that in some of the APIs, and it was terrible. People are like, "Why did I lose my settings?"
Yeah, unless a property is a get-only property that's just reflecting computed state based on something else, but two get-set properties should not interact.
So to customize indentation, you would need to specify an indent text and also turn on the right indented flag.
Yep.
Okay.
Because anybody who's already doing right indented would, they just keep getting their same behavior. So nullable string here is if you don't customize it, you get what the system writes down. That flows nicely from the attribute all the way through the system. And then if you do want to customize it, then you still have to turn indentation on, and you can specify the empty string if what you really want is just new lines.
Okay.
Cool.
So I get we will be placing no restrictions in the length of the thing.
Well, whatever restrictions you feel might be appropriate. Like,
Okay.
I mean,
if it makes your life easier to put a restriction of like 8 characters here or whatever, go for it.
Yeah. So the YouTube chat is recommending, for the, hey, I have to do these two things, is do we want to add a method, like set indentation that takes a non-nullable string and then it sets both things to true. Because one method can change two properties, just two properties shouldn't change each other.
If it really ends up being a problem, then we would probably just have an analyzer that says like, hey, you set one without setting the other. Like, is this really what you meant? But we can burn that bridge when we get to it.
All right. Is everybody happy enough that I don't need armed guards at my house with what's on the screen?
Happy enough. What happens is that as it gets closer to lunchtime in Redmond, we all just kind of are like, yeah, just ship it. It's fine.
Psst, don't say that out loud. It's a secret.
6 months later, we'll come back and be like, "We really want to count."
Like, why are we making decisions on empty stomachs?
Because we were hangry. This is a hangry API.
Or just wait until after we eat lunch, schedule reviews for 1 p.m., and then we all are in food comas while we make decisions.
Oh,
It's just like you're
one
not supposed to
final
shop on an
remark.
empty stomach.
Yeah, Eric, go for it.
Sorry, realizing everyone's with an empty stomach and waiting for me to finish, I'm just going to say, given that the two properties are independent, should the indent text be non-nullable and set to the default indentation of a string with 2 spaces?
I like that.
I wonder if so one of the kind of, I guess, quirks is whether we want the default to leak like that. There's some places where we explicitly support taking and setting the kind of default sentinel or null. And if it's null, we return null, and we don't actually expose what the default is. That way, other code doesn't necessarily take a dependency on what that value is.
Well, that's exactly max depth that we were talking about earlier. That Levi said he wants to change, but that's exactly what it is. 0 is the sentinel, and it's not even exposed what the default max depth is.
But the default max depth is documented as 64. You can never change it.
Well, yeah, it's documented, but it's not exposed in the API.
No, but it's exposed in the documentation. It's exposed in such a way that we can never change it in the future.
Right, and it's a behavioral thing too. But yeah,
Yes.
like,
But I mean,
This would be the
I
same
don't
thing.
understand the leaking of the default value because it's the same argument here, right? We can't just change the default value.
Yeah.
We might as well make it a constant at that point.
right, that's the point. That's why I like it. Just make it a string, two spaces.
Like everybody who
that way-
doesn't configure it today, which is everyone, look at dependency on it being 2 spaces.
Yeah. Like we're not backing ourselves into a corner that we're not already in.
Okay, so does that mean
Okay.
for the attribute type, we would make the property understand if it hasn't been set, it needs to return, the wherever the public or wherever the const string lives elsewhere, or because the property needs to do the attribute property needs to do something. So we can say that one's allowed to be nullable because properties or attributes are weird, and make it non-nullable on the other things. But we can't just say there's no question mark and then get null. So
right, but you can just have it
take
return the
string
default.
literals.
what was that, Tanner?
I was saying attributes can take string literals, so we can just have the code set it and the logic return it.
Right. Oh, I guess that's true. We just need to we would make the attributes constructor just set it to the default value. So if you called the thing that hydrates attributes, then you would see the default. Because I'm just making sure that that we don't, on the attribute, remove the question mark and then return null if somebody actually calls get custom attributes.
Right.
Yeah, and my earlier comment about attributes was only that the attribute properties should not be used to tell you whether somebody declared the attribute with that property set or not. Like, there are other ways to get that information. If you have other reasons for wanting to make the property nullable on the attribute, go for it. But using it as an indicator of somebody set me, I don't think is the right way to go about that.
Right.
Because they could have set it to null.
Yeah, I mean, we do have. I guess it's true that what the actual source generator cares about probably is, did you set indent text, and if so, it wants to copy your assignment. It's probably not going to just unconditionally assign it, though that also would work.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess it can't unconditionally assign it because that would require it hydrated the attribute, which would be a runtime decision on an attribute that may not exist at the time that it was compiling. So, okay.
Well, the source generator has its own language constructs it's looking at to see how the attribute was declared, right?
Right.
So it wouldn't look at the property value anyway.
Yeah, that's true. It's because it's not hydrating the thing; it's only looking at the decal.
Right.
So. Okay, so we got rid of the question marks. Are we happy now?
Ship it.
I mean, what is happiness, Jeremy?
A thing
Lunch
that I've barely experienced since that one point in time that I'm not discussing right now. Ooh,
okay.
Mysterious. Okay. All right.
Ship it.
Approved as was, and yeah.
We removed all ability, I think. It's been improved.
Did we?
Or was it not nullable there too?
Yeah, it was non-nullable there too.
Hey, but now we have the attribute.
And yes, so the fix is now the generator attribute won't be out of sync when this gets written.
Thank you.
All right, that was.
I mean, don't thank us. There's nothing to be thankful for here.
I mean, we concluded the conversation for now.
Well, until it gets reopened. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought we had last time.
And
no, but it's good. It's good that we better understand stuff though, because some of the reasonings that we gave for wanting string last time don't hold up, but we think some of the other reasonings for keeping it do hold up. So, yeah, it's good to get clarification on this.
Yeah, back then, it should be non-nullable defaulting to whatever the current indentation actually is.
Yeah.
Yep, and short-circuiting the 2 or 3 most common cases will be trivial.
Yep.
The right thing, if approved for the wrong justification, can can be reconsidered.
Yeah, we're setting
Alrighty.
better precedent.
Yes.
Well, the backlog is getting awfully small.
Yeah, I saw Steve posted in chat earlier, like we might not even need Thursday meetings for the next several months.
Yep. At least until next January, where everyone starts trying to pile on .NET 9 features.
Perfect. Love it.
Yep. Well, we'll probably make that call at the end of the next meeting to see how many people try shoving things in over this weekend for they're hoping for a RC feature that they just finished designing today. So
Yep. I'm going to have a dedicated API proposal for .NET 9 coming up here soon, but if the backlog's this small, we can just do it on a Tuesday.
fair enough. All right. Well, with that, thanks everyone for joining us. If I still sound, or I guess if all of us still sound like we're somehow collectively holding all the APIs for ransom money, I was going to make a joke, but I won't because someone won't get it. I'll just apologize if that's the case. There we go. But thanks for joining us, especially for putting up with the amusement of we rewrote an API and then at the end unrewrote it, which I actually think is a mark of success, but it's hilarious all the same. And with that, we'll see you at our same .NET time, at our same .NET channel on Tuesday, which even if we don't have Thursday, we will be here on Tuesday. Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye bye.